Probably the hardest and the most profound emotion was, a sense of hopelessness because, just as much as I was trying to sell investors to invest into our vision in a company, I mean, I was selling myself and my friends and family on the same vision of like, this is why we're doing this, and here's how it's gonna be, and this is our strategy and so forth. And ultimately, that vision, at least in the short term, failed.
Welcome to Labels to Legacy, the podcast where we break free from the labels that hold us back so we can step into the legacies we're meant to create. I'm Shelomo Solson, and each week I sit down with inspiring guests and have genuine conversations to uncover their stories of resilience, growth, and transformation. Together, we'll explore practical tools, raw emotions, and powerful lessons to help you overcome mental barriers. It's time to rewrite your narrative and build a legacy that lasts. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're tuning in from so you never miss an episode. Let's dive in. Today's podcast guest is Marc Champagne. He's the author of the best selling book, Personal Socrates Better Questions, Better Life, and host of the top 50 ranked podcast, Behind the Human, which has done over 300 podcast interviews. Marc has spent over a decade studying mental fitness practices of some of the world's most successful and brilliant thinkers. He specializes in training teams to integrate tailored mental fitness practices designed to help clear out mental clutters, to overcome overwhelm, calmly navigate high stress situations, and enhance their creativity, clarity, and focus. He has provided mental fitness strategies to multiple Fortune 500 companies such as VaynerMedia, Google Pixel, Procter and Gamble, Coca-Cola, LinkedIn, and many more. Listen to this podcast episode if you want more mental clarity for a higher quality life. How are you, Marc?
I'm 100%. Here's to mental clarity. I'll take some of that. Let's go.
I want to start off by just saying, by asking you, how are you feeling?
How am I feeling? Good question. I was feeling low energy about 10 minutes ago,
Wow.
and instead of cramming email, which would have continued that theme, I went outside and did a quick walk around the neighborhood. And now I feel present, honestly, and it's just a quick movement around outside with some good
hmm
vitamin D, and here we are.
hmm Good to hear because I know we're doing this podcast interview later on in the day. So we've had a full day already. So it
Yeah.
can be kind of tough sometimes interviewing so late. So I really do appreciate your time.
No, thank you. But just on that point, 'cause, I think it's valid. I mean, and this
hmm
is where when it comes to mental fitness and this kind of like the topic I think we're gonna speak about, like, you're proving the point that you're right. Normally, this time of day is like we get to the end of the day and we're zapped of energy, but it doesn't like just in the last example, like it doesn't take that much to re-energize, right? Like if it was raining and terrible outside and I didn't want to go outside, could get the same effect with 3 minutes of breath work.
hmm
So it's just to show that we don't have to be, like, just make the low energy and stress and all this stuff the norm. There are tools, right? There are tools to help us get out of that.
hmm Let's talk about your book, Personal Socrates. I am currently reading it. I'm about halfway done. Phenomenal book, by the way.
Thank you.
What inspired you to write that book? Because I know you used to have an app before that, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, the app, it was called Keo, and, uh, I mean, in many ways, that's why the book was born. I mean, I never had really any kind of goal or desire to write a book. It kind of just happened, and I got to the point where we were running that app and we had to shut it down, and we, as you mentioned earlier, like we reached a bunch of people with it and so forth. Um, and once I shut it down, it was like, well, I have to continue this line of work in some capacity, and I don't know what to do because that app company and tech company basically shut down. And after doing some journaling myself and really kind of practicing what I was preaching around mental fitness and trying to get clear and finding the path forward and whatnot, uh, the idea of the book came up because it was like, well, clearly people are interested in the topic of being guided by questions and mental fitness, because that's what we were doing with the app. And there was, almost 90 million people that kind of thought, wow, this is interesting. So um, I set out to outline basically an analog version of what the app technically was, and obviously in a condensed, manner with, like, with the restraint of pages and, you can only profile so many people. But that's what started, was just the same mission that literally drives me today, and really everything I do, whether this is the podcast or working with corporate teams, in this space. It's just to make mental fitness more accessible to more people. And as much as we've innovated in technology and audiobooks and podcasts and apps and stuff like that, there's still, like, books are still around. And there's still a good amount of people, myself included, that, some books you just want to hold in your hand. And that's, that was the reason behind publishing Personal Socrates.
Hmm. Before I go into some of the strategies that you outline in the book and some of the strategies that you have on your podcast, I want to ask you, because I've experienced something similar where I had my own networking app, spent about 2.5 years, 2 years on it. How did you feel when you had to shut down the app?
I felt a lot, brother, a lot
Hmm.
of emotions. Probably the hardest and the most profound emotion was, a sense of hopelessness, because, just as much as I was trying to sell investors to invest into our vision in a company, I mean, I was selling myself and my friends and family on the same vision of, like, this is why we're doing this, and here's how it's gonna be, and this is our strategy and so forth. And ultimately, that vision, at least in the short term, failed. And it failed financially. It succeeded in, I would say, about 80% of other kind of facets when it comes to, like, it's the only reason I'm speaking to you today, frankly, and the only reason the book is out there and podcasts and the work I do. But in that moment, I felt hopeless and physically sick on and off, because it was, it's one thing to shut down a company and then go and go to the backup plan, which I did have a backup plan. I was going to go back to the industry I'd come from, but in starting the app, starting that business, and really seeing what's possible in mental fitness, having like practice the practices for a decade, and then obviously starting a business in it, I knew then that that's the work that I have to be doing. So it no longer felt aligned or right to go back to, the industry and the work that I was doing before, which that puts a really, puts at least put myself in a really tough spot, because I didn't know what I was going to do. And in that moment, really the only thing I could do was hang on to my YMCA gym membership and try to stay healthy and walk and journal and do as much as I could to just get clear and not spin out into a really deep depression, which was right there. I could feel it daily.
Hmm. In the book, your book is about asking better questions. What was the one question that you ask yourself that changed your entire trajectory of your life?
Yeah, it was around that same time I emailed a mentor of mine who happens to be on the front of the book now, Chip Conley, um, a well-known entrepreneur and hospitality guru, I would say. He mentored the the founders from Airbnb, Brian Chesky and so forth for many years. And I had interviewed him and we had formed a relationship and I just said, "Hey, Chip, like, here's what's going on. I really need some advice, as I feel stuck and I don't know what to do." And he literally just wrote back with one question. And that question was, "Well, what do you want for your life?" And it was that question that is the reason for the quote on the back of the book that says, "At any point, we're one question away from a completely different life." Because when Chip left me with that question, it paused all of the negative looping narratives long enough to get clear on, okay, well, if this is what I want, then who do I need to speak to? Or what's one step I can take? And I just have to constantly go back to those answers and that question till getting to a point where I could start feeling some progress, which then started to bring back hope again. And that question really unlocked a lot of things for me, and it's the reason why I continue to study and really collect high quality questions.
Hmm. When you ask yourself, what do you want for your life? How did you answer it initially? Was it Did it come up in your mind that you were going to write a book, that you were going to speak, that you were going to have a podcast, or you went through several brainstorming sessions? Kind of walk me through that process.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess from memory, like the what I would have answered then is actually probably not too is almost identical to how I'd answer that question today. Thankfully, there was some clarity there, and I answered that I want to do everything possible to make mental fitness in these practices, specifically, journaling or reflective writing, uh, accessible and relatable to as many people as possible. And the brainstorm or to go a little bit deeper on that around the how is for me, like, my sweet spot is I'm not inventing these practices or questions. Like, my job is to study and interview some of the best people in the world to understand what they do and what questions they ask in challenging, moments in their life. And then my superpower is to take that knowledge and present it in a way that is accessible to anyone. That, like, you don't have to be, Elon Musk to take advantage of some of the questions he thinks about or some of the practices he has or Maya Angelou or Tony Hawk and so forth. So, it was just getting clear on a bit of the how or some of the steps forward. And, at that point, thankfully, I did have, like, because of the app, we had started the podcast. It was called Keo Conversations at that time. And through some of that reflection, that's when my side, at least the decision was made. Well, we shut the app down and took about a 3-week probably a 3-week pause on releasing any episodes, which is the longest I've taken in 7 years at this point. And the decision was, well, I'm gonna rebrand the show, is it the name doesn't make sense anymore, and that's essentially what Behind the Human, is today, and it's always been that same name for the last, I guess, 5 plus years now, which came out of that reflection and that taking one step to, well, I've already been down the path of interviewing people, and I know the power of this. Why don't I, like, what's stopping me from continuing that?
Hmm. Now, when you started the new podcast brand, and you started writing, were you able to monetize right away, or is it something that came in later on? Because I know a lot of new entrepreneurs, a lot of new creators, they battle between creativity, being authentic to themselves, continuing the journey, and then monetizing as well. So, what would you recommend for new creators, new entrepreneurs? Is it something that you look for right from the start, or is it something that kind of develops over time?
Well, I never focused
Hmm.
on monetization at all, actually, to be completely transparent. I mean, even now to this day, there's no ad rolls in the show that I'm reading. I mean, there's some built-in ads from the host right now, but
Hmm.
that's literally 6 weeks old. I mean, so it's been. good 7 years of no monetization in the traditional form that we think about in terms of ad placements. My goal with the show was always to take, and I think this is where, for anyone that's looking at content, um, from a business perspective, is to kind of take a pause and a step back to ask yourself, like, what is it that you get out of creating this content, and what do you want more of? Like, why are you doing this? So for me, it was, I had questions for these people in different industries that I want to learn about their practices. So a lot of that content, sure, it publishes in a podcast form, but where I actually make money doing that is I integrate some of those stories and those practices when I work with companies and some of the brands that you mentioned, and that's what pays the bills. And it's just small segments of it. It's not even me pulling clips, it's me just pulling the knowledge that I'm getting from those interviews based on the client in front of me, that, like, okay, well, LinkedIn, they'll probably resonate with these stories, so that's my open, and
Makes a
the
lot of
other thing
sense.
too is, yeah, and the other thing too is, like, selfishly, it just keeps, every week I have a new conversation and a new topic to explore or person, so it keeps the learning so fresh. And, there's the main kind of parent show behind the human, but I'm running a series right now called Change Ready, which is all around how do we future proof our mind in, like, this era of massive technological change. Well, I want to know from the people that are writing about the future and the people that are also kind of the frontline CEOs, the ones that are being proactive, like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your teams? How are you preparing? How are you leading the team so that, for everyone else that is, struggling in this situation, you can give some inspiration around, like, maybe we should ask some of these questions so that we don't have to be stuck in this survival mode of thinking as
Mhm.
we go through change and innovation, because that doesn't benefit any of us.
Mhm.
Teams are not doing well. I mean, mental health is on the rise. Over 60% of employees say that they're stressed daily at work. I mean, you can't,
That's insane.
it's wild. And I just really believe we don't deserve that. And it doesn't, I'm not saying that the practices that I speak are the only solution, but there are many different solutions within the mental fitness kind of arena that I really do believe it doesn't have to be like that.
Mhm.
And when you link it to business, there's no way that you're gonna come up with the best ideas and see the path, like the best path forward or best strategy, if your mind is fully stressed and at capacity like that, right? So that's kind of how all this weaves in. So now, this is live, that, I'm recording these episodes and at the same time still speaking and doing, sessions with different teams and, dropping them the links. Said there's episodes still releasing. I'm still recording for this series. So if you want to keep this topic top of mind, here it is. So that's a way. It's not your standard kind of advertising, ad model that most of us are looking at.
Makes sense. And you talk a lot about mental fitness, especially
Yeah.
when you go for these speaking engagements for companies, in your podcast, in your book. Can you elaborate more on that and what do you mean by mental fitness?
Yeah, mental fitness is just really anything that we do to train our minds to work for us instead of against us. It's like you can look at it as the umbrella term of, it includes mental health, it includes mental performance and optimization and so forth. But it's feels, at least, and this came out of the app. I mean, I started using this language because whenever I'd say the words mental health, they just come with a lot of stigma, right?
Mhm.
It's like, oh, you're pulling yourself out of a hole, which I understand sometimes is true. And we've come a long way, definitely. Here in Canada, with a lot of things like Bell Let's Talk and so forth, we're speaking more and more about our mental health openly. But what I see and what I feel in not just Canada, I mean globally, that people are looking for the tools, and that's where I think we're falling short on the conversation. Whereas, and that's where I really do think mental fitness provides at least an opening to talk about this. And there's this relatability with mental fitness and physical fitness that usually links really well with people, because people get physical fitness, but it wasn't always the norm.
Mhm.
I mean, in the early 1970s, people weren't jogging and doing this level of activity. I know this because I had a slide of People magazine in our pitch deck for our app, and the caption was they had 2 kinda Hollywood stars. They were jogging on the beach, and the caption was, "Everyone's about to start doing this," or "Running is the new thing. Come join us." And the date of that magazine article was 1975. That's not that long ago where they're talking about this new craze of running and physical fitness. So, and the other thing too is just like physical fitness, if you don't like to run, it doesn't rule out all of exercise. There's
Mhm.
a million different things you can do. So it's same thing with the mind. I mean, if you don't like to meditate, then don't meditate. Do some breathing, do some journaling, take a walk outside. There's a million different things you can do for your mind that we just need to experiment and be open and try some different things and then work different ways into our routine so that we stay consistent.
Yeah, and I do believe mental fitness and physical fitness are tied into each other. For
For sure.
example, I hear a lot about people that went through challenges. I've Tony Robbins, David Goggins. Those are just a couple names where they were struggling at some point in their life. They started exercising, running, lifting weights, and they were able to get out of a certain rut. Uh, I'm a perfect example too. Went through some challenges in my life, and I think I've been consistent with the gym almost 2 years between running and lifting weights. And I definitely can see a change not only in my physical capacity, but my productivity as well. I'm
For sure.
doing better in my career. I'm more present with other people. So I do believe I'm a strong believer in physical fitness. It's a great way to start some type of mental health journey or mental fitness, as you say.
Yeah. Well, all of it supports each
Hmm.
like, I'm of course biased with this work because if I would suggest where people to start, it would be, well, start with your mental fitness because your
Yeah.
mind is the thing that's telling you whether you're gonna go to the gym or not, right? But to your point, and Tony Robbins talks about this a lot. I actually have a Personal Socrates chapter on
Hmm.
him. It's a bonus chapter that I wrote, and it's all about, his priming techniques that he uses in the morning, and Tony talks a lot
I
about,
used to do a lot of those a
yeah,
few
right?
years
Change your
back.
state.
Yeah.
Change your state, change your mind. Your physical state, change your mind, and it's so true, right? So again, it's another tool, and it's like when you feel physically fit,
Yeah.
you often feel mentally fit as well, and kind of vice versa. Like you can play off of both of them, and then you add in good nutrition as well. And I'm talking about, you know, uh, like food as nutrition, but then also mental nutrition in terms of content that you're curating to put in your mind.
Hmm.
I mean, this is where we become unstoppable and where we're truly, you know, aligned on so many different factors of being fit that it doesn't matter what's thrown our way. We have the tools to be able to process. It doesn't eliminate the hard emotions that we're going to feel,
Hmm.
but we'll just feel them a little less intensity and a lot shorter duration when we have the tools to process those kind of situations.
Have you been to a Tony Robbins seminar?
I have not. I would love to go one
Oh,
day.
you should definitely go. I
Yeah. Have
went,
you?
yes, November of 2019. It was right before the pandemic.
Okay.
Life changing.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
wild
there's
what he can
10,
do.
15,000 people. I went in Miami, and I went with my sister-in-law, and just a lot of people. You're there for 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours. I don't even know, for 3 days straight.
Yeah.
And I'm the type of person that can't hold attention for that long. But during that whole time, you're experiencing every type of emotion from happiness, excitement, being sad, being angry. You're tearing up at certain times. It's just wonderful.
So what does he do that I mean, because 'cause I've watched his
Yeah.
documentary and obviously follow his work, but, like, what is it that you experienced that allowed you to stay energized through such, like, varying degrees of emotion, let's say, for 12 plus hours?
Mhm. he has another trainer. He doesn't do the whole seminar the whole time,
Yeah,
but he has another trainer with him and a few other speakers. But he's able to tap into your emotions by helping you get relaxed, you know, throughout the thing. You close your eyes, you kind of imagine certain points in your life. And I guess
okay.
he's able to tap into that emotion somehow, some way.
Yeah, wow,
And then I also
impressive.
walked on hot coal too, which
Oh,
was
yeah, you
pretty
did
amazing.
that?
Yeah.
Good, that's awesome. Good for you.
Who was your favorite interview in your podcast, or some of your favorite interviews? Would you say?
Yeah, it's tough. There's so many, I mean, it's almost been 400 people at this point.
That's crazy. I'm at like
I mean,
100 right now. I
yeah,
can't
well,
even.
good for that's good though. I mean, I don't know what the stat is. I feel
Yeah.
like I think it's under 10, most podcasts get to, and then they kinda give up.
Hmm.
So, I mean, 100 is a lot. Um, I mean, it's top of mind, so, I mean, my mind is kind of naturally going because this is this week's episode, but I interviewed Jerry Colonna, for the 3rd time now,
Wow.
on the show, and I just share this on social media as well, like, there's something different about Jerry. Jerry's, been known as the CEO whisperer in terms of he coaches CEOs and whatnot, but before all of
I've
that,
heard of him. Yeah.
yeah, it's Jerry Colonna and Fred Wilson. Fred was his partner at Flatiron Ventures. Now we're going way back, but that was one of the first funds that kind of supported the whole, basically the internet craze, like Web 2.0 phase of technology. And they would have been like the AZs of today's world kind of thing. Um, and anytime I get on behind the mic with Jerry, it's just I can't predict the emotions that he'll bring me through. I mean, I have of course, a topic that I wanna speak to him about, but it's almost impossible to stay within kinda that constraint, and you just have to follow your intuition, which is a beautiful when you tap into that flow state, from interviewing someone like that, the topics that come up and the conversation and kind of the impact that surfaces is always just next level. And it's a bit scary too. I mean, I think the last time this last episode is the first time out of the 3 that, I wasn't in tears.
Wow.
Like he has a way to kinda like Tony Robbins to really move around emotion, in just a really unique way. So he's a big favorite. I really I interviewed Kristen Holmes from Whoop, earlier this year,
Hmm.
which that was a really fun interview, and, like, just I reference that interview often on stage because there's so much relevance with sleep and some of the study results that they're showing and so forth, and she was
And
just
I
a
heard
great
that
interview.
after you drink alcohol, Whoop. Actually, a few friends told me how Whoop can track how it affects your performance the next day.
Oh, yeah, I have a Whoop as well, I've been doing, uh, sober October, but it's kinda going into, I think, until December 15th. You see it right
Yeah.
away. It affects your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, and Kristen's been talking about this, recently. You know, even I think it's if you have 2 glasses of alcohol or more, it's not just the next day. There's a tail to it of 4, I think 4 to 6 or 4 to 5 days where you still see the impact
Jeez.
of alcohol. So, it's interesting because alcohol is just so intertwined in just our society and from a social perspective, and I do I miss that component, but when you really now that look at the study and the results, z absolutely nothing good about it. It's poison in your body. There's no there's no scientific, point you can make to say that, "Hey, alcohol is doing a good thing here." Even the longevity docs and whatnot, or when you look at the blue zones, and I know they say some of these areas where they're having a glass of wine or so, um, it just the science doesn't support that. I think it's
That's
other
crazy
factors.
because
Yeah.
you hear a lot of times people say drink in moderation, even glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine. But nowadays, I'm hearing a lot that even moderation is not good for you. And, lately I've been thinking more and more about giving up drinking. It's not like I'm a big drinker anyways,
Yeah.
in the past couple of years, but man, I don't know.
Yeah, it's no doubt. I
And I
mean,
had
I
a
you
coworker who did Whoop, and she was telling me about her data and how she wants to give up drinking too, and it's just
it's hard to
insane.
unsee the
Yeah,
data. That's the thing, like, and especially when it's your own data and you're
yeah,
looking at like, okay, well, it's a real obvious correlation here.
yeah. What would you say has been your biggest, well, your top 3 lessons from interviewing almost 400 minds?
Hmm.
What would you say the commonalities are between, some of these great minds?
Well, by far the top insight, the I guess the top piece of advice that I've picked up from all of them is that every single one of them do something to still their mind and allow their mind to rest and think. And that's not talked about as much. Like you especially when you look at, billionaire CEOs and so forth and that's actually I mentioned before we hit record, I'm heading to Boston tomorrow. I mean, I'm going to interview one of those CEOs and just looking at the research, it again, you can or the prep, you can see like that's the superpower is there's that individual takes time to think versus, I see it with teams all the time. And I was on this side too when I was in the corporate space. You have these back-to-back meetings. Um, you finish one, you get into the next one. You have no time to process what just happened before. Then you get to the end of the day and you just feel jammed with information and things to do because you haven't been able to actually do your work. And you're either working late or you're leaving in a state of like you just feel anxious, right? And with these leaders and the ones that I would say are mentally fit, they have practices and processes in place to not arrange a system like that. They're not because it's not like they have no shortage of things to do or decisions to make. But they engineer an environment that supports and allows them to think and allows their mind to recover in like little micro bursts. It's not long. It's sometimes just taking, a walk after lunch for 10 minutes or like I said, having blocks in between meetings where you can just process and think and take time off and so forth. So just that superpower of thinking, I think is so important, especially in today's world where it really does feel like a lot of people are on autopilot and just get up, do the same thing. I need to do this, this, and this. There's other people thinking for me. There's robots thinking for me. Um, the ability to stop, pause, and actually ask some really good questions separates, I think, the average from the elite thinkers, right? Because that's those are the ones that are asking the big questions that are surfacing naturally around like how I remember I interviewed Naveen Jain, and this always sticks out, and he's a well-known tech entrepreneur and was a billionaire at one point.
Wasn't
And
he the founder of, what's that? The testing company?
Viome, yep,
Viome. Yep. I
yeah, he's
recently
still
did a Viome test
there. You
a
go,
month
yeah.
ago or 2 months ago. Yeah.
So there's Viome. He had another internet company at one point. And he also runs or used to run. I think he still does. Moon Express, which was or is a private space company, and I think they're the only ones, at least when I interviewed him at the time, that had were licensed to land on the moon as a
Mhm.
private company. But all to say, like Naveen I remember asking him about like I'm like, how do you come up, with these billion-dollar ideas and solutions and whatnot? And it's like you have to come up with you have to think about a billion-dollar problem first and be able to think about, okay, well, what are the problems that if I really put a lot of energy and attention and resources to have the opportunity to impact a billion people? And, to go through that brainstorm and that thought process takes mental power, mental clarity. Like you can't do that from a place of just being ultra stressed. So that's what I mean by, they all figure out ways to make sure their minds are operating really well. The other thing he shared with me that always sticks with me is he said, whenever I'm presented with a huge opportunity from the team, if it's an investment or a big business decision, it's like I look at all the data, people come in with slides and charts and stuff like that. But then I ask everyone to leave the room, and he closes his eyes and puts his mind 6 months in advance and tries to see himself having made that decision and the business and the people operating with that decision already made. And if there's anything that intuitively feels off, he says no. I mean, that takes a lot of, courage to do something like that. And again, mental capacity. And he told me it's saved him millions of dollars when it on paper would have looked like a really good deal. Right, but those are the things that we don't see in the Forbes write-ups or the CNN articles and whatnot, where you see, top billionaire, acquire so and so company or whatever. There's a bunch of mental fitness happening there in the background. There has to be, because they're operating at a whole other level. And it's the same thing with athletes and award-winning designers and writers and so forth. They all have their practices.
Mhm. How can someone find peace within themselves, or as some time where they can just think? Because I know corporate burnout, that's real. Well, not just corporate burnout, but just burnout in general. It's
Yep.
real, and a lot of people burn out because they are in nonstop mode as far as work. People have kids, families, financial responsibilities, trying to work out, always trying to be productive. How can someone take a step back from all of that and just think, or just have some type of peace in your life?
Yeah. I think you first have to set a commitment to yourself, or really really have a belief that you deserve better, and not say this from a place of judgment, but like, and I'll put the question in the frame
Hmm.
of the person, like, but like, am I waking up feeling good more days than not? And often the answer is no. And that's not where we want to be. Of course, we want to wake up feeling energized and ready to go. So, whatever that answer is, just don't judge it. Just treat it as data. No different than probably what you're doing in your job when you're evaluating data coming in, or insight or market research, like whatever your role is, right? We get the data, and then we make a decision based on the data. Then we look again and see, well, did that work or not? So same thing, if you're not feeling great, when you're waking up, not feeling rested, well, then why? What's fueling that emotion? And just this takes seconds in the morning, and I would encourage people to set up a check-in practice like this and link it to something you're already doing. If you're, a lot of the people I work with, like, they love the process of the first cup of coffee, or that morning routine. Maybe it's a glass of water, maybe it's a cup, tea steeping, like something, but everyone's doing something in the morning typically. Well, just take a few minutes for yourself before grabbing your phone. And if that's going to be too hard, make sure the phone is not near your bed or where you are in the morning. And you say, well, that's how I get up. Well, fine, like, buy a regular alarm clock. Or, I used Whoop for the longest time to just wake me up from vibrating on my wrist. But now actually I don't use any alarm clock. And I'm naturally waking, because now I've figured out kind of my sleep cycles with all of this data, and just naturally wake up within 10 to 15 minutes of the time I want to wake up. And that feels so good when you get to that point. But I didn't start there. Right? Started with the check-in questions of, how do I feel and how do I want to feel? And where can I make some small changes to just cut the fuel source of the things that are driving unwanted emotion and feeling? And then the more you do this in the morning, when you have a little bit more control or agency of your day, the more you become more self-aware. And then you start to pick up on things in the midday. It's like, oh yeah, this is like, I don't feel super great. Or just as important, I feel fantastic, energized, and awesome. Well, why? Like, like, bottle that stuff up, because you're gonna need that, because we know naturally we're gonna go through cycles, right?
Now, when
We're
you're
gonna hit
writing
dips.
when you're writing down stuff about how you feel, do you recommend I know you used to have an app, a journaling app, but would you recommend writing it down on your phone? A piece of paper is better. What are your recommendations?
Well, the my recommendation is use whatever tool, you have available and that feels right to you. Now, if that tool is digital and it involves your phone, I'm gonna have to make an assumption here just based on the data out there, but your phone is probably not set up in a way to be healthy for you. So if that means you're gonna pick up your phone and then you're gonna hit with notifications, that defeats the purpose. So don't do that then, and I would say write in a notebook or something else, right? Um, but if your phone is set up in a way that you're not gonna be disturbed for a couple hours in the morning and that's the tool or app you wanna use, then perfect, go for it. But the key coming back to the example of physical fitness, and we've heard this one before. I mean, get your gym clothes set up before you go to sleep. Put your shoes there and your shorts and stuff like that. So that as soon as you get up, you grab your stuff and you go. Same thing with this. Like just set up your environment so that if it's going to be a notebook, put the notebook there, get your coffee cup set up, and like look forward to that moment of calm and that check in and that peace, right? Because I'm telling you, starting the day like that, even if you're checking in and be like, I feel some anxiety. I mean, it takes minutes to identify where that's coming from, and you can just set a whole new course, right? Because no one says, "Hey, I'm gonna wake up, and then on Tuesday morning, I just wanna feel anxious all day." I mean, no one says that. So you have the opportunity to say, "Okay, well, this is how I may feel, but here's how I want to feel, and here's how I wanna show up for myself and the people in my life today," and you set that intention. And if you wanna take it to the next level, then have some book near that area that if you pick that book up, and maybe it's a podcast, but again, just be real with the technology, right? Like, there's teams around the world that are their sole purpose is to get us to use the apps and their technology more and more. So, let's just be honest with that. So, if you can do without tech in the morning, then go for it. Pick a book up, whether it's Stoic philosophy or some sort of like Tony Robbins stuff, like anything that that if you read a few pages from that book, you're gonna feel primed and ready to go, then just imagine that. I mean, you've got a check-in, quick little journaling flow, some inspiration in a book, and you start the day feeling fantastic.
Mhm. You talked about the question that changed your life, which was what do you want for your life? And you've talked about other types of questions, like most. You just talked about how do I feel, and you ask that every night and every morning to kind of see where your level is during
Yep.
the day. But what is the process, or how can people ask better questions depending on what they're going through in their life? Is there a particular process that you have to go through?
Well, you need to get quiet in
Yeah.
your mind, right? So and it's like anything, coming back to physical exercise, like, you don't start with the marathon, right away. You start training, and eventually you work your way up, and you train your muscles to be, fit to be able to do an event like that. So it's the same thing with mental fitness. Start just by these simple check-in questions. You can throw in some gratitude prompts at the end of the
Hmm.
day, right? Like, what can I celebrate, from the day, or what would I have changed this for out of today that I'll learn from for tomorrow, and so forth. Because then what happens is when you're faced with a big moment where you really need some good clarity, you'll take that morning time and you'll ask for that guidance. And a good question for that is like, what am I pretending not to know in this situation?
Hmm.
Because usually it's like, or a similar question, like, what am I hearing in the whispers? And we have the answers to all of this kind of stuff. It's just typically our minds are running so fast and so cluttered that they don't surface. So, but if you put in some of that baseline kind of foundational work, you'll use that time, a couple minutes in the morning, and answer a big question like, what am I pretending not to know, from a way deeper level. And if you need help to really get into that state and there's still stuff on your mind, that's where you can start practice stacking. and you can bring in something like a few rounds of guided breath work. I mean, there's a million different things people can YouTube. I use Othership, quite a bit. Um,
It's called
Wim
Othership.
Hof. Othership, yeah. Othership is you're Toronto-based, right?
I'm Tampa, Florida.
Tampa. Oh, I thought you were in Toronto. Um, so Othership is a breathwork studio out of Toronto, but they have an app as well that's obviously
Okay.
available globally. Wim Hof, I mean, I did Wim Hof this morning. You can search him. Take you, 5-10 minutes to do a few rounds of breathing. But whether it's breathing or meditation, like something that after you do it, your mind feels good, then you start to ask some of those bigger questions. You're just 5 steps deeper in the whole process than coming in cold.
Hmm.
It's like a warm up for your mind.
In your book, eh, you talk about Pablo Picasso,
Yes.
and you talk about framing your life into different segments, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
I found that interesting because, I think my life in that type of way as well, where I kind of label certain situations of what I've gone through, positive and negative, based off of the period in my life. But what I've also found in, not only myself, but with other people, we might have gone through something 15, 20 years ago, something that was negative or traumatic. Um, but we still carry those thoughts from 15, 20 years ago into what we're doing now. I like to call them labels or
sure.
uh, self limiting beliefs. What kind of questions would you ask yourself to kind of get rid of those past negative labels that don't really apply to you yourself today, but you still kind of believe it?
Hmm. Well, I mean, one thing I'll say is
Hmm.
I'm not a therapist, and
Hmm.
I definitely don't play one on the internet. So,
Absolutely.
my my job though, and especially with the Picasso chapter or flow that you're referencing, like the one step on top of your identifying your segments or in like 5-10 increments is
Hmm.
also assign a color to that era. So the whole reason behind that flow or that mental fitness is to get us again to pause and reflect on where we've come from. Because before you can start unpacking, things that may have happened, we've got to stop and acknowledge and understand like what has happened and some of those, and then to your point, put some labels on, in that segment of my life, like these were the ups and downs, and these are
Hmm.
the things I remember. Most people have not done that, and they're just kind of pushing through and just continuing, right? So it's in that reflection where then from that place you can decide, okay, well, I think there's something. That's where a question like, what am I hearing in the whispers? If that segment of your life is coming up, like I need to process that. I didn't spend any time processing this, whatever the situation is. That's the cue to say, okay, well, what do I need to do here? And maybe that's like for me, I've used men's groups quite a bit for work like that to go back in the past. Maybe that's finding a good therapist. Who knows? But you'll find something. There's no shortage of tools out there, but you need to understand to find the tool. You need to understand like what you're working on first, because then from that place, and usually in parallel as well, you can take control and start looking at, well, these are the past chapters of my life and here's where I want to go next, right? And write that story as well, right? We have the ability to do all this. Like we don't have to be on this autopilot and just live someone else's life. We just need to take time to think though and be more intentional with where we're trying to go.
Hmm. What's worked for me, I know for myself, not sure if you know this about me, but when I was younger, I did get bullied a lot for speaking a certain way. I had a speech impediment. And so I went to speech therapy for many years. And this kind of lasted the whole bullying for my speech impediment for about 10, 15 years up until
Mm,
college. Um, and I had this mindset in my head, even though at that point I was speaking pretty confidently. Any role that I had in my job where I had to speak, if I wasn't doing well, I would always blame my speaking.
Hmm,
And so I really had to
yeah.
unpack some of those self-limiting beliefs about the past and kind of get rid of it of why I'm feeling it in the present moment. It had nothing to do with my speaking ability at all. Sometimes I have to remind myself um, about those situations. But what are some,
We need those reminders all the time,
yeah,
for sure.
what are some labels that you've had to overcome about yourself?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm in it right now. There's still there was some ti like, when I feel stressed or anxious and, if I'm looking, projecting into the future and, like, is do I have enough work
Hmm.
booked and so forth, like, a lot of that, I have no evidence to support, that story, to come true. Because in reality, when I do look at things, like, yeah, there's a lot actually in the works and so forth, and it's never been a problem. But the more I unpack it, and I've been doing this with my men's group, the more that shame is coming up from the app days, where, yeah, we were really successful in certain aspects, but then, it all came crashing down. And like I said earlier, those were the hardest moments of my life, and not just for me, I mean, my family as well. So there's a lot of shame that, um, I'm processing right now to let go, and because everyone's still here with me on the journey, but I feel it, I feel the struggle of those years, and I definitely don't want to go back to uh to that experience. But at the same time, and this is not unique to me, but y- it was also kind of the greatest gift, right?
Hmm.
It's what sparked all the other work that I'm currently doing. Um, but yeah, I'm like anyone, like I think we have to be constantly reminded about whether it's our past or just like common triggers that we have and the way that we're responding, and the way that that surfaced for me was in that morning reflection. Like why am I, I had a significant, like a really good opportunity kind of materialize and come to fruition, and I just remember thinking, why don't I feel really excited about this right now? Like, it almost feels like if I get too excited that I'm gonna, jinx it
Yeah,
or
I
I'm gonna
definitely feel
lose
that
it.
sometimes too.
Yeah, and that's what came up, recently, and it was like, "Oh, you didn't really process some of that trauma from the app." I mean, I processed a lot of it, but there's still some stuff there, which comes back in a funny way, right? So,
That's why you should never compare yourself to other people on social media. I feel
yeah, for
like
sure.
because you don't
Yeah.
know what they're going through and what they're thinking about themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's
Yeah.
mental, like, it's mental junk food. That's
Hmm.
what I mean when it comes to the nutrition stuff,
Yeah.
like, there's we've gotta protect what we're putting in our mind.
Yeah.
We can pop on to social media and so forth, but, like, even I had a good reminder of that, last week. So I mentioned Kristen Holmes from Whoop, and I've got a collaboration coming out, and I was trying to message her through Instagram, and I found it kinda weird. She wasn't really getting back to me, so finally I'm like, "Hey, are these coming through?" And she's like, "I'm so sorry, I have a 15-minute app limit, so it's really hard for me to get through messages." And I thought, I'm like, "Of course she does." I mean, she's, like, super dialed in with her health, but it reminded me as well, like, "Hmm, in a healthy comparison,
Hmm.
maybe I should have a little bit of an app limit here." I don't think I'm out of control, but again, it was just like it's okay to look at this without judgment, and just, she's someone I really respect, and I know it has her health top of mind all the time, or as much as as much as as she can, of course. Um, what's something I can do in a healthy way, and that was, one reminder that's been recent. So,
Just to some, just to close off the podcast episode,
yeah,
since it is a Labels to Legacy podcast, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
it's a big question. That's a big question. I mean, at the end of the day, and this feels this feels really big and kind of grandiose, but I still have a lot of time to work on this. But I would definitely love to be remembered, as someone who was really optimistic and positive and made a big mark on leaving people's minds better than when they were found, in whatever way they came through, whether it's content or within the organization. But, um, for me, it's that. It's really just unlocking kind of the full potential, and I don't mean from a work performance, I mean just the humanity and allowing people, uh, to feel good more days than not and live a really thriving life because of that.
I love that response. Love it. Well, you're doing a good job so far, I would say,
Well, thank you.
because I'm reading your book and I'm definitely taking notes and highlighting some things. Um, it's going to be interesting to see how I apply the book in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, I'm interested as well.
I'll let you
Take it
know.
slow.
But Mark, where can people find you and buy your book and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you for the great questions and conversation. This was a lot of fun, and as you can see, I mean, end of day and I'm energized. So,
Hmm.
to me, that's a big win. Just mchampagne.com or behindthehuman.com. Everything leads to the same place, and the book's there, my work's there, the podcasts are there, and so forth. And Instagram is mchampagne. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just the only thing I would, especially with this episode, I mean, share something that you like, and most importantly, if there's a question that has been really impactful in your life, share that and tag us because the guarantee there's someone on the other side because we'll obviously reshare what you post. There's someone on the other side that will leverage and benefit from your question, and this is
Hmm.
where the ripple effect of this kind of work can be really impactful. So, yeah, don't be shy.
I appreciate it, Mark. I appreciate the podcast episode, and I appreciate you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Labels to Legacy. I hope today's conversation inspired you to break through your mental barriers and take one step closer to the legacy you're meant to create. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment, or share it with someone who might need it. I also share short clips and provide a lot of valuable content for you on my Instagram at Shelomo Solson. Have a great rest of the week and see you next Monday.